Alrighty, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Subscribing to My Podcast. Because I have a new guest featured every week, it makes it very difficult to maintain consistent viewership. So if there's one thing that you can do to support me or the guest featured on the show, it's by interacting with my channel in every way that you can. You can always decide to unsubscribe later if you decide that you hate me or my show. With that plugging aside, enjoy my discussion with Caleb Weingarten is an opinion writer for the Iowa State Daily here at Iowa State. I've recently read some of his stuff, and then he actually reached out to me a couple months ago asking about the podcast, and I thought it would be a wonderful opportunity to feature somebody who writes so much of the stuff that's happening on campus. But Caleb, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and then tell the viewers some of the important things that they should know about you.
Yeah, as you said, my name is Caleb Weingarten. I'm the opinion editor at the Iowa State Daily. I think the thing that people, I guess, might be most interested in about me is the fact that I write so much about, as you said, the happenings of our time, if you will. I'm kind of a boring person outside of that, but I mean, I'm very politically engaged. I'm interested in ideas and philosophy, as you know. I would consider myself a very open-minded person. And I have a wide array of interests, so perhaps we can dive into some of that today.
Yeah, I'm really interested in that, and especially reading some of your stuff. I found it. There was a lot of things that I guess if I were to try to predict what you were about to write about, I don't know if I would have predicted some of the things that you wrote about. But I guess to start, tell me about like the Daily and what writing for them looks like. How'd you get started doing this? And I guess tell me about your experience writing as a Daily member.
So my time at the Daily started, if I remember correctly, the first semester of my sophomore year. I met with the opinion editor there at the time. His name was Max, and they just wanted columnists to write like once a week or something like that. And I had never written, publicly before. I hadn't ever published my views, but as someone who's interested in politics and in writing and ideas more generally, I figured that might be a good idea to kind of express some of those. And so I started writing at the Daily that semester. Continued on throughout the year as a columnist. And then at the end of my sophomore year, Max graduated. So there was a vacancy for opinion editor, and that opened up, and I applied. And so far that's kind of how it's been. As far as how does that work? I mean, I really appreciate them. They give me a lot of liberty for what I can write about. And I think they appreciate the things I write about. So it's been a really good experience. Everyone at the Daily is really good. And I think that they do their best and work their hardest to especially in the reporting. I would say there's very good reporting at the Daily. I think they do an excellent job reporting on things around campus or in Ames or in Iowa more generally. And then, I think the biggest thing that I can vouch for them in the sense that they give me the opportunity to write what I want. And that's, as a writer, that's like the best thing ever.
Yeah, it's like a playground.
Yeah, it is.
So when you say they, are the higher ups also students who are in this?
The editor-in-chief is Cleo Weston. Yeah, she's a student. It's a student-run paper, but there's like some executive and administration people that kind of just help like with the logistics behind it. But yeah, other than that, it's completely student-organized and student-run.
That's really interesting. Does that, to me, it would be hard to justify having a leadership position if like a student is telling another student about their writing. To me, that seems like a weird authority system to me. Like that would be hard to engage with. So when you're saying they like what you're writing, have you ever gotten like criticisms or critiques? Has anybody in the Daily been upset with something that you've written?
I don't know, actually.
Oh, okay.
I'm sure that there's certainly articles I've written that they disagree with, but they've never tried to hinder me off of that basis. I would say they've really haven't challenged me at all. I mean, I've maybe written about a topic like a lot, maybe 1 week or something, or past 2 weeks, and they say maybe like, this happened more last year. Like, okay, maybe we'll maybe try to focus on something different so we have some diversity, but that's been about it. Yeah.
Okay. So you don't feel like people are breathing down your neck or like trying to. Okay, that's really cool.
Yeah.
And so I guess how do you figure out the things that you want to write about?
That is an increasingly difficult task, but I follow a lot of what's going on. And so when you're engaged in current affairs, you really never run out of opportunities to write. And so that's kind of basically how I operate. I've also really started doing a lot of like reviews on, say, literature, and that's why I talk about philosophy too and stuff like that, because I think it sort of taps into another part of what I'm interested in that doesn't always require like a current event to be happening. I can kind of go into like my collection of books or maybe what I'm studying in class and kind of choose a topic from there.
Okay, and then I guess when you do you ever feel like there's an audience that you're pandering to, or like maybe some sort of audience capture that you have to be adherent to when you're writing? Like, do you feel as if you want to write about something but you can't because there's just not an audience for it, or are there any decisions that are made like that?
No. Well, I think there's like two answers. When I'm writing about, say, like a personal interest, I think that the audience it'll find its audience essentially. I know that there's enough people on campus here who say care about like book reviews and things like that. In politics, I explicitly try not to pander to anybody and just
Yeah.
literally voice what I think, and that's how I think everybody should go about it and should write. That might be why my beliefs are a little hard to track down and pinpoint
Yeah.
because I call it as I see it on certain things. So
Yeah, and I think that's definitely how it should be, which is interesting. Do you get a lot of interaction with students? What I didn't really think about when I was reading some of your stuff is that there were comments on your articles. Do you read these? Like, talk
yeah.
to me about how people engage with your work.
I read them less than I did because some of them are very, some of them are longer than the article themselves. And so I'm like, I don't know why you don't just email me and you can have, free range to the opinion.
Yeah.
I do read some of them. It depends on what the issue is. I mean, the more controversial ones I will read. I also read them to try to see maybe any blind spots in what I wrote, if I can improve my arguments, if there's a fact I didn't quite get or something like that. That's really the only reason. I don't look to them to form my opinions, though.
Are there any particular actions or reactions that you remember that were really crazy, out there, bad, or I guess really good? Have you ever had interactions with people that you're just like, holy cow, the Iowa State is very uneducated about this thing or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, inherently writing about politics and especially in a very like incisive kind of, you might be attacking a certain politician or you might be critiquing a particular viewpoint. And so just by that fact, there's going to be a lot of people who comment that you might be like, who disagree with you and be like, yeah, this person doesn't know what they're talking about. So I think that happens inherently, but I would say mostly my like writing about international affairs has really attracted some people that just say quite literally whatever they want.
Okay, well then maybe they should get a job as opinion writer.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you guys won't have to worry. Are there other opinion writers or?
Oh yeah, I have columnists. The thing about it is it's really, there's not like a rigid set schedule there's no quota rather. And so sometimes that can be difficult to have a consistent, roster of columnists who submit frequently. And so that's why I write so much. But I do have a lot of really good engagement from, I would just say, the Iowa community in general. I've had like Randy Feenstra send op-eds in. I mean, that it's really from the bottom up. Any student can submit, anybody in the administration, anybody in Iowa politics can submit. And so I would say I have a pretty diverse cast and decent engagement. Yeah. But if anybody's watching this, and they want to write, please reach out to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's better when as many people as we can get right. I think it adds a better diversity of opinion to the.
Well, I guess as editor, I kind of misunderstood what that means. Are you reviewing other people's work and putting it out there? I guess, like, what do you do as an editor specifically?
Yeah, I mean, so first and foremost, I write, and then when someone submits an article to me, I kind of facilitate what we publish in that section. So my role is limited to the opinion section. If someone submits an article to me, I read through it. I mean, the minimum criteria is it has to be like coherent. And which you'd be surprised at how many people send some and they're not. And it has to just you have to make a case for something, make an argument, try to make a point about something. I've, in a lot of my topics, or rather articles about free speech and stuff, I made a point that, you shouldn't be turned down on an opportunity to express your viewpoint. And so it's very important. It's like the cardinal virtue of that section. And I think the Daily as a whole is just diversity of viewpoint, allowing people to express themselves.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. You've written a couple times about free speech and what that means to you. But I guess broadly, talk to me about why free speech is important to you, or why we should even allow some of the things that are being said to be said.
Well, I think it's the most foundational of all rights. If you don't not have a right to say what you think, you don't have any other right at all. And I think secondly, if you're an advocate of imposing rules on people's speech, then you better be prepared for those same rules to be imposed on you should the roles be reversed. I also just think that if you are not tolerant, not just tolerant, I think that the notion of tolerance gets too much praise in some sense. Like you should seek out people's contradicting ideas. And I think when you start to, even really horrible things, I agree, people say some awful things, but they say those things, they have that right to say it. And I think if you revoke that right, they can easily say that the things you're saying are awful and attempt to take that right from you as well.
Yeah, and I think it's particularly interesting because it's weird because I feel like even people who call themselves people who want to change the way free speech is understood, they identify themselves with this, but even they would agree with kind of what you just said, that speech is this foundational principle. Mm-hmm. I think one of the problems is that a lot of people who are especially free speech advocates want to throw more free speech at the problem to kind of solve it, and then that might be having more harmful effects for what free speech is. So it's not necessarily that free speech shouldn't be allowed in a legal sense, but maybe it's this moral thing that maybe free speech isn't necessarily effective at maybe sharing the truth or maybe sharing things that are good or something like that. So the problem's not necessarily a legal one or like a one about rights, but it's more about socially and morally what should we be allowing people to say. Does that kind of make sense? I guess, how do you feel about the limits on that?
I don't really buy it. I think like the legal and the moral, I think it's really a distinction without a difference. I think the legal, right to speech kind of enshrines the moral right as well. Like you should be able to have the right and no one else to say what you want to say. Morally, I think that's the correct position too. I don't think being offended is a good enough argument to trample someone else's speech.
Yeah, and I think maybe one of the difficult points is that like there's a lot of people who get particularly offended by things, and that's the kind of speech that they're wanting to get rid of. But there's also this maybe newer era of fake news or this newer era of things that are just a lie disguised from a truth-telling source.
Sure.
And that's kind of maybe more what I'm talking about, in that like you have these things that are supposed to be an allocated resource for the truth. And then these people are straight up lying with a level of social impunity, maybe not legally, but they're not facing the consequences of something. And their argument is more free speech. And so I guess like, is there some sort of moral imperative to maybe increase the awareness of the truth, or maybe the social thing that like free speech is good, but maybe not 100% free speech? Like, is there any line or concession that you'd make about people just straight up lying?
No, I'm pretty much an absolutist on this. I also think that the only way you can combat, I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you're talking about like more misinformation, deliberate misinformation. And that is a real problem in especially the modern era with social media. And I mean, everybody has like 10 different media sources that they listen to. So tracking down the truth can be hard. But I think the only way you can correct that is through more free speech. I hate to keep saying that you have to throw more free speech at it, but I don't think you can get to the truth without free speech. I think those two things go together. And yeah.
And I think it's particularly hard. I've been listening to a lot of doomer material, I feel like, and it's lowered my acceptance rate of the media that I'm listening to, I think.
Yeah.
But one of the things that they say is that with this like level of alternative media that exists now, that the standard for good speech is being lowered because of just the oversaturation of speech that exists. So things that are just presented as facts but totally unfounded are being socially accepted, and that like maybe there shouldn't be this legal rebound, but if there was some body that could be writing down every single time somebody is just straight up wrong about something to hold them accountable, some sort of social accountability that we can spread as an awareness to combat bad free speech is maybe more what I'm talking about. And that like when Dominion sues Fox News about this like voter fraud thing, why is there such a large group part of the population that does not know about this or like talk about this. And that's like especially frustrating when you're a free speech activist, but like the free speech is not hitting, it's not working, I guess, technically.
Well, I would say that the ability to confront things is a virtue of free speech. I don't think and also as far as somebody who can track and judge what's correct and what's not. Like, I mean, like you said, say, a politician lies, tracking that lie and making that known that they lie, that's a function of free speech. And that's not necessarily limiting someone's speech claiming that they lied, but it's a fundamentally different thing to just say that person can't lie at all. And I also don't think anybody can really answer what qualifies one person or a governing body to judge other people's speech. Like, I don't know one person I would entrust with the responsibility of judging for all of us, what speech is right and what speech is wrong. I don't know if that's answering your question.
No, it does. And what you're kind of saying is that this is being able to do that is a function of free speech, which is true.
Yeah. It's not to say that there's, a big issue, I would say, and I'm sure we'll get into this later, but I see it mostly stemming from the political right and with people like Andrew Tate and things like this is it's not that they should be deplatformed necessarily. I think people have the opportunity to invite them on platforms or they don't. But they do use free speech as a way to say incredibly provocative things, things that are just not true. I think a lot of like conservatives too like to cause just controversy and be obnoxious just to do it and then hide under the free speech thing. And that is their right. It doesn't mean they're not being annoying and provocative and obnoxious, but that's just how it is. And I think that the beauty of it is that then people can attempt to correct that.
Yeah. Well, and I guess my point wasn't necessarily about like the essence of free speech. It was more about this idea of throwing more free speech at it, which I don't even necessarily think I disagree with. I just think there are certain caveats where like it would be nice if instead of valuing speech for being free, we could value speech for its accuracy or something like that, which is, I guess, a very naive and wishful thing to say. I just know that like, I guess legally, like we already have reprehensions for people who lie. You know what I mean? Like Dominion sued Fox because of defamation.
Right.
And so there are things that we can do. There are acts of the law that we can do.
Yeah, I mean, that's another, the beauty about it is if you say something and you're wrong, you're held accountable for it.
Theoretically,
yeah. Right. And not in the sense that you're held accountable because what you said is disagreeable, but like in a defamation suit, it's because what you said was unfounded. But if you, and also I think throwing more free speech at an issue is kind of the solution because not everyone has access to a Rolodex of truth in their head. Sometimes they need more, dialogue around an issue. They need more controversy to kind of understand what they think. And if that's suppressed at all, then I don't think people are making any real progress.
Yeah, and you'd kind of said earlier too, a point that I really appreciate, which is like seeking opposition, like seeking things that disagree with your viewpoints, which I think is super important because I feel like exposure does wonders for coming closer to a correct opinion, or at least to just a more diverse one, informed one, Whether or not that's misinformed is maybe up to chance or, the way the world is working right now. But at least knowing the existence of other things is really important too. So I did appreciate that point.
Yeah, I just think that that's the best thing someone can do for themselves if they care to be educated, is just seek out argumentation for its own sake. Not because you're necessarily trying to prove a particular agenda. I think that completely defeats the purpose of it. So, yeah.
Yeah, and so, I mean, you're pretty engaged with the current political landscape. So I guess the election just passed. There was, depending on what kind of media you listen to, the results were very expected or very surprising to you. But I guess how would you lay out the groundwork for the current political climate right now? Like, where do you stand? How do you see Democrats versus Republicans, left versus right? Where do you think the issues are? I guess just paint the picture for me.
Okay, I'll do my best. It's a difficult task.
Yeah.
But first, I'll just start with the election and the results of that. I think I wrote a column about that, why I believe Kamala Harris lost. And there's a couple of reasons a lot of people are pointing to different things. I think, first of all, she just did have a difficult. She had an uphill battle from the start because her campaign was very short. So I think that reflected in her not being able to formulate a good enough plan that people trusted, compared to like Trump has had a lot of airtime saying what he's going to do. He's had a lot of there's been a lot of media and controversy over what he's going to do. It's pretty cut and clear what his agenda is, and I think people, undecided voters and swing voters, appreciate that. And I feel like the Democrats have essentially become a status quo party when really they were the party of reform, and they've kind of isolated the progressive wing within their own party. And conservatives might like that, but I think it's to their detriment. I mean, I certainly think that's why they lost the election. One of the big reasons. The left versus right dynamic, I think, is almost irrelevant anymore. I think most people have issues on either side. I think I talk to a lot of conservatives, and it's interesting. I won't bring up my political beliefs, but a lot of them will agree with me on social things. Like even my own family, they'll agree with me socially on things, and then when I question them about certain policy or something like that, they don't. I think a lot of it comes from a lack of understanding of what would happen, but I also just think, in summary, that people are hurting a lot in this country, and I think this election reflected that a lot. And you see the two biggest issues were I think were the economy and immigration. How immigration hurts Americans is debatable, but I think there's no question that the economy, though it's performing well, I just don't think people are feeling that. I mean, I grew up in the middle class, and I don't know your background, but it's tough sometimes to make ends meet. Everything's very expensive, and people don't know why, and I think people are kind of afraid, and so that's why I think you kind of see the unraveling of the traditional political divide. That's why Trump performed a lot better with these people. I've heard a lot of people say, like, I'm not a Republican, but this is just what I feel like is right now. And with the way the Democrats have behaved, I can't really blame them, though. I'm not a Trump supporter.
Right. Yeah. You always have to hedge.
Yeah.
And I think that's really true too. I think the problem is that it seems really emotive to just say that you feel as if the economy isn't doing good. Like even if there were maybe statistics or things that would prove you wrong, or if maybe there was a policy that were happening that you could predict would make the economy worse. Mm-hmm. I still feel like a lot of people might have just gravitated towards a new government, just throw new people in there to solve this problem, which I think is really detrimental to making an educated decision. But that also comes at the cost of maybe that's because the Democrats didn't do a good job of conveying this, which is kind of what you're getting at with her.
Yeah, and if you look at a lot of Trump's recent appointments, I mean, it's very interesting what's happening. But I think people see that as a sort of middle finger to the establishment, to the traditional people, or the people who have traditionally been involved in politics. Like, for example, I think that Kamala Harris campaigning with Liz Cheney and getting the endorsement of Dick Cheney was about the worst thing she could have possibly done, because those are establishment politicians. Dick Cheney's an architect of the Iraq War, and the Clintons and the Obamas. People don't trust. A lot of people in America do not trust them anymore. They do not trust the legacy media anymore. And when you keep pandering to that crowd, what happened on election day is a reflection of that. I mean, the polls had it close and stuff like that, but people might think I'm lying, but I knew Trump was going to win. If I had to put my money on it, I would have had him winning. I wouldn't have had him winning the popular vote, which he won pretty substantially. Mm-hmm. I think that only reinforces what I'm saying, but I think that's the general state of affairs.
Yeah, and that's really interesting, I guess, about the career politicians. Mm-hmm. I think it's just kind of, it doesn't necessarily make sense to me that some of the people that Trump is appointing right now are the wealthiest people in America who own the biggest. Elon Musk is such a bizarre example of not a career politician when he's the richest man in America, heading the largest social media platform that engages in a lot of political rhetoric. And it's this is the guy you trust. Yep. It's very bizarre to me.
I think it's almost a contradiction too of what conservatives stand for, especially with Elon Musk. So if you talk to a lot of conservatives about politics, they'll say they hate big bureaucracy. They hate big government. They, and but they want to let the richest person on earth start another bureaucracy.
Yeah.
And I know that it's to supposedly check government spending and to make a bunch of budget cuts, which is a conservative platform, but we don't know how it's going to work yet. But I share your kind of awe at it. It's a very bizarre thing to me, and it's a weird thing to get behind. I don't really quite know how that's going to work out.
Yeah, and I don't know how it became the point. I think one of the problems is that there's a huge villainy for people with wealth. Especially comes from the left. And so what corner are you going to go into? You're going to go into the side that really accommodates you for the wealth that you've acquired. So I think that's where this comfort comes from. But it's like you said, it's really bizarre that is the head that you're choosing to drain the swamp.
Exactly. And when a lot of the people who support the wealthiest people on earth are not that wealthy. A lot of
yeah.
Like I see these memes all the time, and it's horrible. But it's like, a hard laborer, waking up at 4:30 in the morning to go work 16 hours, and then but right before he has to go on and defend Elon Musk, protect our geniuses, on Instagram or something like that.
Yeah. So I don't know. I definitely think if you're going to create villainy in a lot of these people that have curated success, you shouldn't be super surprised if they're going to jump ship. Which billionaire is also doing this? Is it Zuckerberg, who's starting a band and becoming super shredded and engaging in a bunch of kind of right wing?
Well, all of them I think
have
taken steroids or something, except Elon Musk. Jeff Bezos is jacked now.
I don't know what's going on with
Zuckerberg is he's he hangs out with UFC fighters. He's in the MMA. I don't know what his role in politics is right now, but I mean, as you say, if you're a big corporation and they promise you lower taxes and less regulation, I mean, why not? Why wouldn't you support them? And so
yeah, I guess that accusation is really weird to me, because even 6 years ago, that was the accusation that the Democrats were receiving, is that they were going to make it easier for big business, because that's what Republicans are scared of, is that big business is going to come, and then we elect
I think Republicans are more suspicious of big government. I think they don't care about corporate power, really.
That, I guess, that's probably true, but I think they correlate the two, and when they're attacking bigness in general, but now I feel like it's just the most supportive people of the Democratic regime are equally big government-wise, but maybe not nearly as big as the Republicans right now, who are incredibly rich, i.e. Trump and Elon and stuff like that. So I don't know. It's really interesting. You had said something interesting too when you were describing the political landscape about progressivism versus the left. I guess, what do you mean by that? And walk me through that.
That's a difficult distinction sometimes. I think a lot of people on the left might consider them a liberal. They might actually be progressive. I think progressives generally believe, what we were talking about, progressive tax reform. So you hear the slogan, the Bernie Sanders slogan, pay your fair share, universal health care, a bigger emphasis on government social programs that can directly intervene in people's lives to help them. Liberals are, this is a good, I think progressives are far more suspicious of unregulated capitalism than liberals are. People might disagree with me that nowadays, because a lot of people who are way far left can call themselves liberals, or people who are on the right term people who are on the way far left liberals. But liberals are more conservative than they are progressive. They believe in free market capitalism. They pretty much just as much as the conservatives do, with really basic distinctions. I think more government involvement, but not quite as much as progressives. I think they're more willing to uphold conservative values too than I think progressives are. But again, that's kind of a hard distinction to make. I don't think people can easily track themselves down on whether they're progressive or liberal.
Yeah, well, and I think liberalism is just a lot more supportive, I guess, of the United States as a functioning entity than maybe progressives are.
Yep.
I mean, definitionally, I think that's what progressivism is supposed to mean, that we're going to progress towards something else, something new. And so then liberals are more we're liberated, we're free, this is awesome, something like that. Obviously, they're not that positive about things, but that's the general distinction that I've made. What's bizarre is with the election, it seems as if, to me, it seems as if conservatives are becoming a little bit like their distrust for the big government of the United States and the way things are now has created such a big conspiracy that I don't even know if they're supportive of the United States anymore at all either.
No, not really. And I think that's also a big distinction, a widening one between conservatives and liberals. I think liberals are more likely than conservatives to trust government institutions. And so you see a lot of liberals in response to, say, the draining of the swamp, like, Trump wants to get rid of a lot of these bureaucracies, completely defund them. I think everyone knows that there's corruption in our government and in corporate collusion in a lot of our federal bureaucracies. But I think rather than dispose of them, the liberals are more willing to just try to reform them. I think they share that with progressives too. I think they share less contempt of the government just in general. And I would agree with you that I think that conservatives are much more, I think, libertarian in this sense. In the sense that they want to, they're okay with abolishing certain bureaucracies or establishing new ones, completely changing how the government works because they believe it's pretty much non-recoverable. I mean, Elon Musk said on Joe Rogan that this is like the last chance we have to save America. That's what he said.
Well, and this is really bizarre to me because they'd always represented themselves as the American-loving, like, this country is perfect group of people, and I feel like only recently has it kind of evolved into this new, like, we kind of actually hate this country and we want it to change pretty radically, or at least they're becoming a little bit less aware of the way that our country is changing. As long as it's from a conservative that it changes, then they're more okay with it.
I think it's more like that. I think that they actually love America, but I think they love their version of America. And I don't underestimate the nationalism of some of these people on the right, man. I mean, they do love the idea of, and I love the idea of America too. This is what I hate, is that people on the right have hijacked like this idea that America can only stand for conservative values. I think that's completely absurd. And I think our history is modeled with very terrible things, but at the same time, it's a quite radical experiment that we've been able to conduct and achieve great results from it. I think, in general, there has been a society that this is like we might be declining to some extent now. I think that's because we've been trying to operate on excess. Like we've just tried to push the envelope on so many things that it's kind of like blowing back on us right now. But I think we were the first, constitutional republic. I think that's an incredible feat with all their misgivings. I think what the framers and the founding fathers achieved was something extraordinary.
Yeah, and that's kind of the problem is that the two sides who disagree with this, which I would say are the progressives and then now most recently the conservatives in a lot of ways, they're such a loud group of people that it's like they're creating this huge disdain. Like, it's hard for me, like, I can't even have the American flag on my person walking around without getting attributed as conservative. And it's really weird how if you don't kind of denounce progressives, like if you're a more liberal person and you don't kind of denounce progressives, you just have to get lumped in with them. Yep. If you're not willing to kind of draw the line and be like, yo, I don't hate the American flag though. That's all you guys, like, you're an enemy of like both sides now because you're still liberal, which is the enemy of conservatism. Yep. And then now you're the enemy of the progressives as well, which is really frustrating because you can't even like wave a flag around anymore.
I think that's why a lot of people in like my writing and stuff, like they kind of consider me like the gadfly. Like Socrates considered himself, though.
I'm not sure I know that term.
Well, Socrates considered himself. I'm not comparing myself to Socrates, but he compared himself to the gadfly of Athens. Like people would get mad at him when he would, because all he did was question him. He wouldn't advance really anything of his own, and so he just went around irritating everyone in Greek society. And I feel like that's kind of the function that I assume with the writing is. But I think Sartre had a quote on it that says, like, when you upset both sides, you're on the right track. I might have misattributed that, but most positive said that. But And a lot of people think I'm like really conservative actually because of some of the articles I've written. Some of the same reasons why you might say that I might have libertarian undertones.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, because I do believe in our country. I do love our country. I believe that because I think we can fix it, and I think that we have the system in place to fix it. But we have a whole new array of challenges that I don't really think stem from like an inherently bad quality of our country. I think everybody's dealing with the advent of technology and social media and the internet. As we were talking about earlier, the multiple different streams of information that I think are making it very difficult for people to think about how the world is going. But yeah, I mean, I share that observation that, you either have to be like America first, isolationist, like we're the greatest people that ever exist, or you have to hate them. And I think that's a terrible.
I'm getting pulled apart here. Yeah, it's really weird to be, because I would consider myself like a centrist. I'd consider myself in the middle, as in I have varying opinions on different things, is what that ends up meaning.
Yeah.
But it basically just means that I say the opinions of my favorite pundit. You know what I mean? That's basically what it ends up being. Yeah. Who my favorite pundit ends up being, like maybe centrist this day, and then later it'll be something different. So, but I just think that a lot of it comes from, I think technology is a really good point that you brought up. I feel like a lot of it comes from just, there's so much more room for distrust. And I think this is why conservatives are getting onto this wagon of hating on America, because there's so much more room for us to just not believe the things that are happening. I think someone had described technology as like, there's so much room in our phone for us to just stop understanding what's happening, and then we can start filling that in with conspiracy. We could fill it in with things that we just want to believe. Whereas maybe 100 years ago, like there wasn't really a lot of room from paper to my eyeballs that I could like really conspiracize about, and so I think that does a lot with just creating distrust, just creating things that we can't really feel comfortable about anymore, which I think really sparks that divide. I don't know if you see this a lot since you write and you do these news, but I guess like, how do you trust even the things that you're reading or the things that you're saying?
That's a tough thing. I mean, as you say, we have people that we think are right about things, and so we take influence from them. I don't think that legacy media, like people like places or publications like the New York Times, the Washington Post, I don't think they're completely irredeemable. I think they provide a general outlook of what's going on. Sometimes their covering on certain issues is biased. That's undeniable. But I mean, you kind of read the news to develop a sense of what's happening. And then I think you go into your own little bubble to try to find out what you think about it. And that includes media. But I think that the advantage to that and the constant flow of information is the fact is, like you say, a long time ago, we had the paper and the eyeballs. And that's a really easy way to control people and control narratives. And so I think sometimes a conspiracy might be a good thing if it's really not a conspiracy, right? Whenever you have something that's antithetical to what the current narrative is, you're always going to label it a conspiracy, but that might be the truth. And if social media enables that to come out, then that might be a positive thing. But as a writer, I think it's important to still defer what you are writing about to some sort of authority, as far as like, I'll read a New York Times article, I'll see what's happening. Scholarly opinion is very important for me. I think academics are undervalued. I think the role of the university still plays a massive part in what people think, because everyone can start a YouTube channel and say whatever they want, but they haven't. What's their authority? And I don't think people should listen to one particular thing completely. I hope I'm answering your question.
No, and you did, and I guess I have a couple questions about that, because I guess one of the scary parts is that as I am in my senior year of my bachelor degrees of college, and as I'm interacting with professors and as I'm applying to grad school to get my PhD in this stuff too, I cannot see the light at the end of the tunnel to where I feel like a qualified person to say anything about anything. And I don't know why, like, as I become an adult, I'm starting to understand how unqualified people can be about areas that aren't in their very specific expertise. And so when you say trusting your institutions like academia, a lot of people kind of wince at that and they're like, ugh, but our schools are turning our kids gay, so I don't think I can trust them or something like that. And that just makes people like really, it's a weird thing that you might need to justify within yourself. So I guess like what is your reaction to people who are just like skeptical of academia, who don't trust these things because of?
I think that's reasonable to some extent. I think academia, the problems with it are more administrative rather than, I think, at the faculty level. I've never had a professor, never, that has ever told me what I should think. I've had very open professors. I've had professors express concerns to me over the administration environment that makes their life harder. I think the idea that people specialize, the idea that people, that's what it's for, is that community of everyone who are experts on different things. I think it's okay to defer to that authority. And if you can't trust that authority, though, then like really who can you trust? So that's why I think that these institutions are so important. Like if there's issues on universities, rather than everyone go establish their own universities, let's fix these, let's reform them. And so that might be where my left leaning comes out a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and that's a really good point too, because people will fill in the blank of like, who do I trust? And it's like, well, I'm just gonna trust this person on YouTube. You know what I mean? And it's like, I don't know if that's the better option. Like really, I mean, if you can't just distrust academia, why are you distrusting the person who makes millions of dollars to feed you information? Like, why is that the next step? And so I think that is a really good point on like who you can trust, and we can reform these things. And that is a really good point too. I don't know if I've ever felt pressured to believe something. I've heard some things that instinctually I'm kind of like, oh, I don't really know if I agree with this, but that's when it's used as an example to describe a thing that does exist. So even then I'm just like, oh, that example was bad, and that's it. I'm able to shut that off. So as a professional college lover, I agree with you on this.
And I think too, the fact that like students can register disagreement with their professors is an incredibly effective and important thing. I think that's part of teaching, part of education. And I think the reason why a lot of people love the independent media, and I love independent media too, but I think a lot of it can confirm biases, and it's a very, very potent echo chamber. I mean, it's hard to get out of. I think that's why a lot of people are suspicious. And like, I have a lot of people comment on my articles, for example, that, I think what a lot of people criticize universities, I think they mean a lot of the elite ones, like your Harvard, your Columbia, and I think that a lot of that criticism is warranted. But I don't, say for example, if I have a professor that's a Marxist, or something like that, I don't see why that disqualifies them from teaching. Like, there's conservatives who go, well, I think it was some statistic, this could be totally wrong, but like 3 in 5 social science teachers identified as like a Marxist or something. And I go, well, one, they defend their belief, and 2, are they attempting to enforce their beliefs on other students? And if it's yes to the first question and no to the second, then I don't see what disqualifies them from teaching. That's the one thing I'm very suspicious of from the right. It's like they want their version to be taught. Like, you can't teach Marxist economics, but you can teach like Austrian school economics by, Ludwig von Mises. And you can teach Milton Friedman, and you can teach like all this stuff. But, I thought about that. I was listening to this one academic. He's a Marxist economist named Richard Wolff. And he said that when he wrote his dissertation, I think at Yale, it was like on British colonialism in Africa, but he couldn't use the word colonialism. They didn't want him to, because it sort of identified capitalist, I think, exploitation and excess, which is colonialism. And so he had to change it. It was like British economic involvement or something like that. And that's the sort of thing I am suspect of on the right. This sort of, and this antithesis to what the current college environment is. I'm not saying it's Marxist. I'm just using that as an example. I don't believe it is at all. I don't believe our administration's like that. I think they're more liberal, progressive, things like that. But teaching American values or teaching Christian values or teaching, like, it's shocking to see how many people advocate the teaching of enforcing religion in schools and things like that. Like these very core values that I think we've all agreed on as an American society are sort of being upended and sort of rationalized now. And so while I think the criticisms of universities in a lot of cases are justified, I think the antidote or the perceived antidote to that I don't think is effective at all, nor is it morally right in my opinion.
Well, and it's a little bit ironic too. This seems like an attack on free speech as well.
Of
Like
course
if
it is,
it's
yeah.
going to be something like that, and obviously the defense is going to be something along the lines of endangering our society, and endangering other, which is the exact thing that liberals are trying to do 8 years ago when like a lot of the inclusive language thing started happening too.
Yeah.
But that was crazy, and this is not. But and then obviously the roles are reversed. So I'm not even going to
Right.
purport that there's a right answer to either of those. But it's like, at the very least, how can you not see that this is oddly ironic when it comes to like colleges and stuff too?
And I think there's a huge wave of conservatism on our campuses. I don't even know if you've known that just being around here and seeing like the I think young people, I mean, this reflected in the election too. A lot of young people are becoming conservatives. I think there's a number of reasons for that. But I mean, no, I agree with you. It's tricky to identify where we go from here. I think that's the $1,000,000 question that I don't think anyone has a really good answer to.
Yeah, I think. Well, I think there's maybe a level of naive trust that would be important to have so that we can push things forward.
Yeah.
I just feel like right now there are too many things pulling in different directions and pulling really hard that to me, that's where it seems like the risk of becoming like whatever your other favorite country is start to rise.
Yep.
So like the conservatives being weirdly obsessed with Russia right now is just really bizarre because the harder they pull at the distrust for us towards a trust of like Russian information, the higher likelihood that we're just going to become like Russia in the same way that these liberals who are polling because or these progressives who are polling at the United States because they want to be more like maybe some English country with like different kinds of reforms is more likely to bring us in that direction. And I just think that maybe some this is where I was kind of getting at with the free speech thing, like some sort of adherence that we can encourage trust, that we can like really heighten our standards for who we are pounding on when they make a wrong claim. Like stuff like this, I think would really help with people so that at least we can be on the same factual foundation together about what is actually happening as opposed to, just conspirizing until we just move to a different country.
I think that's important, and that's why I think the institutions are worth reforming. I think establishing that trust is very important, and I don't think you do that by. You might make an argument that tearing the whole thing down is the only way to recover it, but I think in our case, tearing the whole thing down would be disastrous, and I think that I don't think we could ever rebuild to the way that we were, and like the left gets a lot of flack here, but I mean, I've spent a lot of time in Europe. It's way more progressive over there than it is here. Things that they consider, communist here is like normal policy in places like Ireland or, England's a little bit different because they have a pretty contested, they're always flipping conservative labor, but France too, though, I mean, Europe's very volatile right now. I'm not making assumptions, but that's just generally what I noticed. Like Bernie Sanders, for example, would be somebody considered like a normal liberal out there. Like in Scandinavia, universal health care isn't a radical reform.
Well, yeah, and that's kind of where it's weird. Where an appreciation of where we are right now is really important because we're not that bad.
No.
You know what I mean? In terms of everything that you might think is terrible, like just close your eyes for a second and remember we're all on the same team here. Like we're working together on these things. And this is kind of where I say that one of the more fundamental problems is this disdain for America, this disdain for the things that we're doing right now that I think is just totally just backwards. And I think that one of the things that the left really struggles with is not drawing that proper line when people are pulling, especially on the progressive side, pulling way too hard. And you got to be like, stop, you weirdo, stop doing that. Like, being able to draw those lines and say those things was so important. And I feel like as a society, we kind of missed that point. Like 4 years ago, 5 years ago, we should have been stopping some of the people, and this is more in tune with social issues, but also exists with other things too, where we should have been stopping people like, okay, you're not one of us. Just drawing those lines might have been so easier, but I guess I just don't know what to do. I don't know what to do with this. To me, it seems like it's a distrust thing that's causing this ununity, but I guess if you have a different diagnosis.
People are incredibly distrustful, and I think that I've said it a couple times, that reflected on November 5th. To them, and that's why Bernie Sanders was very successful in the Democratic primaries and things like that, but the Democratic establishment they don't want him, and that's those are glaring issues of the Democratic Party, and people don't forget that. I've heard a lot of conservatives say, "I'm voting for Trump," but the reason, look at how they treated outsiders like Bernie Sanders. That's why I don't vote for the Democratic Party. Because if they're not willing to let outsiders come in, like the Republican Party is letting an outsider come in, like Trump, why won't the Democratic Party do it? What do they got to hide? Don't they want to be reformed too?
Right.
And I just for the record, I hate that people refer to Trump as not a politician. I go, he's been a big time politician for 10 years now.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of what I was gonna pick on too, towards an outsider, a billionaire, New Yorker, past president is an outsider.
He's a con artist. In all reality.
Well, yeah, he's a lot of things, but I just and that was another thing too. I guess walk me through. I get just broadly, what are your reactions to just Trump in general? If you were to talk about maybe some of the glaring issues with the Republican Party and their support of Trump, what does that look like for you? Or any support you have for him as well?
Trump, it's interesting. We're both seniors, and if you think about it, Trump has been the defining political figure for our entire, adolescent, adult life so far. That, when I thought about that, that was very interesting and kind of alarming thing to me. But I think what he represents in his influence over society is kind of this tectonic shift from, or a desire for a sort of de-establishment, a decorporatization. But we can get into all that, how that's ironic with Trump.
Right.
I think what he represents is a sort of cleaning house. The issues I think with him, one, he's very, no one can really, it's not a serious argument if one's not willing to consider the fact that Trump is probably the most divisive political figure in modern history. I don't think that's really even debatable. And I think when people question the adverse reactions he gets and why people don't like him, just look at the way he talks about people who don't like him. And in some ways, the Democrats have fed into that. The left has fed into that. And I think that's exactly where he's successful. But I think that he's sort of established the Republican Party as this platform where if you identify yourself as a Republican or you're part of MAGA or whatever, it's like a warrant to say whatever you want. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't be able to do that, but I'm saying it's people wonder why their reactions to them are bad when his political career is founded on being obnoxious. That's what it is. It's never about policy. It's his rallies are like a WWE SmackDown event, and it's just and not only that, but he's a compulsive liar. And the fact that the people who he's appointing, qualifications don't matter. It's a loyalty test. And the fact that people know that and are okay with it. That's why I see issues with the Republican Party, is their willingness to sort of concede any decency and go along with whatever he wants. And you've seen way he's talked about people who he was once buddies with and now hates, or vice versa. All the people he's appointing, I've called him the absolute worst things.
Yeah.
And so but you wonder what motives are there. You wonder why that is. And so that's suspicious to me. I think that's an issue that they haven't addressed. And I think a lot of the people in the Republican movement who are, they're in the honeymoon phase right now. I think the real work starts when he becomes president. He has a lot of pressure on him to perform. And I think so far his campaign has been all theatrics. It's been all saying he's going to do stuff. I would argue that he wasn't very successful his first term. And I think my main problem from him isn't even necessarily policy. It's how socially divisive he is and how much he just doesn't care and how much his supporters don't care that he lies compulsively. He's like a career liar. That doesn't matter to anybody, it seems like. Like his behavior does not matter. That's the biggest issue in my view.
Yeah, and I think you touched on pretty much everything I would have wanted you to. I think that's a beautiful summarization. I think one of the problems with what you're saying is there's two things. One, his divisiveness gets attributed as a good thing because it's like, well, yeah, he doesn't like that. He's saying he doesn't like the career politicians don't like what he's saying because he's telling the truth, and it's like they don't like that he's divisive because he doesn't just give them whatever he wants. Right. Like these are the kind of cope measures that I feel like get thrown around a lot when people hear those things. And another thing too is that it is so incredibly effective. Like, I mean, think about the makeup of the Democratic Party, and how diverse that group is. In that, like, Democrats are voting for Sanders as well as Harris, and then the people who are voting for Sanders absolutely hate Harris as a candidate or something along those lines, or who would have voted like, whatever, these third party that are actually just Democrats, but they disagree on what even it means to be on the left. Am I Democrat, liberal, progressive, all of these things. But when you have one unified figure, I'm just going to blindly follow this person. There's no outgroup for the Republicans. It's either you like Trump or you're out of here. And that's like definitionally just what it means to be conservative right now. And so it's so effective. Even like if you have a problem with his rhetoric or if you have a problem with how divisive he is, it doesn't really matter because you're not penetrating the army of people that support him. Whereas the Democratic side is so ununified that like they're not even getting to fight on they're actually fighting on policy, which is bizarre nowadays when like it's so easy to just have rhetoric bounce right off your shoulder because it's like, well, he's our guy, so we just support him.
And I think that's, you make a good point about the internal divisiveness on the Democratic side and on the left in general. Their ability not to unify is one of the reasons that cost them the election. And I think in the other case, the fact that I think when Trump was president the first time, there was a lot more disagreement within the Republican establishment about how people felt about him. But I think now that's kind of withered away. You're not like, think about how some of these politicians, okay, so just a perfect example, his president-elect, Vice President J.D. Vance, called him America's Hitler. And now you're that guy's vice president. I'm not comparing Trump to Hitler, but I'm just saying that's an interesting thing to think about and how he's been able to mobilize people. And that essentially in politics, that's the more people you can mobilize, that's how you win elections, And
and if you think about it, where's his old vice president right now?
Yeah.
Why isn't he running with him?
Yeah, if it was a little bit closer, he would have been in a grave right now.
And this is kind of what I'm saying. Like the unity, it is very obvious, and I think one of those things where it's like the following him is effective. I mean, it is just the right thing to do, because the option of not following him will have repercussions. Like, I mean, if you look at his old vice president, like, or anybody who had supported him. So, like, you look at all these people that he's electing who, actively disliked him, called him Hitler. It's like, well, they said now they would have supported him because there's so much reward for following him, and there's so much punishment for not. This is the kind of like unity that just can enact things.
And it's there was people on January 6th who were like, they had a gallows set up outside the Capitol for Mike Pence. I mean, that's unbelievable that he And I mean, just for the record, I do believe that Trump incited that. I think it's foolhardy just to try to. I mean, people argue that he didn't because he didn't say, "Go in there, break into the Capitol." That's not how it works. You know? But no, and I think they also think that I think there's a difference in opinion just among moderates towards President Joe Biden. I think that like his age and the way he performed in the debate, and you know, the Republican establishment has been very effective at pushing like inflation, immigration, and the culture war issues. Their messaging on that has been like, you know, they did it perfectly. And I heard this one Republican strategist saying that they adopted a lot of the Democratic techniques and like door knocking and talking to people, and it's worked. It's like paid dividends for them. So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting phenomenon. The Trump phenomenon is one that's going to be like I always tell my like people I'm close to and my friends and stuff, like, I wish I could be around in 200 years to see what they would write about this in history, you know?
Like what this point would be, because I think January 6th is the perfect example of the in and out group and just what that means, and how quickly that shifts.
And notice how there's no allegations of election fraud.
Oh yeah, for this election, it suddenly disappeared. It's all gone.
Actually, there was some people I saw on Twitter, like there was votes still being counted in like Arizona or Nevada, and they're like, Trump had already been called the winner. They're like, how are they getting away with this? I'm like, dude, you won the election.
Yeah, you can stop now.
You won the Electoral College with over 300 electoral votes, and you won the popular vote, which Republicans almost never do.
Yeah.
They're still fraud.
Yeah. So I just, the boy who cried fraud, I guess.
Well, and it's like, there's minor cases of election fraud in every election, but they get corrected. They get it figured out. Dude, and that's just one thing. Like, that's such a core part of our democracy and our system that it's just like, it's a very telling sign of the state of the country when you can't even trust like your elections. You know,
this is what I attribute to be the massive distrust that spawned on the conservative end. This is where I think it started, and I don't think morally I can ever forgive Trump for this. And it's not even that January 6th was particularly bad or violent or anything. It's just what it stands for and the mental gymnastics you'd have to do to not see it for what it is just mind-boggling to watch. I mean, you have
smart people.
It's incredibly smart, but even then, the people who are watching it, it's like 65 court cases. And none of them, like 64 of them fail to do voter fraud. The first people in are recorded banging the door down. They are like Proud Boy members. They are currently like convicted of this crime of breaking in at this point. And a lot of people still use that dumb excuse of the cops let them in. And it's like this, it doesn't track from that statement what I just said. If the first people breaking in were people breaking in, had nothing to do with cops. And that's like the important thing that starts the waves in. Like, of course, cops are going to let in 1,000. Are they going to mow them down? What do you think is, what do you think is going to happen?
Right.
And so it's like, and then that with like one of the greatest points I heard about January 6th that just really like opened my eyes. And it's like, if you're saying that Trump didn't incite this, you're saying that it's coincidence. Was it coincidence that he said these things and then this happened? Like, where do you think the distinction is that he happened to do this and he happened to sit around for 3 hours while this happened before he did something? Like, is this all just chance? Or like, I don't really know what you're supposed to think, but all of this mental gymnastics to feel this way about what had happened that day, I'll never forgive that.
I mean, it's not hard to draw the logical conclusion that they were there for him, and his insistence on not conceding the election was a motivating factor behind that. If he had conceded the election, that event would have never happened. And some people think that the idea that if he lost on November 5th, that you can predict with 100% accuracy that he wouldn't have accepted that election results, automatically disqualify him from even being able to run. Well, I mean, to people me, can do what they will with that, but that's obviously not how it went.
Yeah, to me, morally, I just think that like, I mean, here's the deal. I'm like center, and I would say I'm right leaning. I'd say I'm center right. That's just how I grew up, was right, and then I'm slowly liberalizing as I get older, and increasing what I'm exposed to.
And I don't mean to interrupt, but I don't even think like having that position is an inherently leftist liberal position. I think that that's the morally right thing to do.
And this is kind of like what I'm getting at, which is like I'm center right, and I would have liked to vote Republican. Like I just really would have liked to do that. But I just think the scale of this, it's like you have a career politician, you have like a Democrat who has policies that I don't necessarily love, with values that I don't necessarily love. All of that is still lighter than, or all of that is still heavier than just the horrible actions that have, like just the straight up distrust of democracy that morally I can't support. I'm not even that emotional about it. Like I'm not angry about it. I'm not upset about it. It's just like literally a moral valuing. To me, who becomes president doesn't actually have a ton of influence on the things that end up happening. That's going to be more of your local government and your state governments and stuff like that.
Right.
But if I'm going to make a decision, the only person who has the chance to really change way too much is someone who's just going to like ask for criminal immunity to things that you can do, and then also try to overthrow the election.
Yeah.
That's when it's like, okay, maybe the president is a big deal, and so that's why you vote against it, I think.
And that in order to be in cahoots with him, you have to do a loyalty test, pass it.
Yeah, and then now you can get hired as his without qualification as somebody in his cabinet, which is
Linda.
which is
I
wild.
think her name is Linda McMahon. It's the wife of the WWE founder, Vince McMahon, and she's going to run the Department of Education.
What?
Yep. And with no teaching. Like, I think she said that she wanted to be an educator, and I think she ran for Senate and lost. I haven't looked into that fully, but I'm pretty sure that's the case.
And now this is interesting too. I had a conversation with some of the guys from Young Americans for Freedom, and I talked to them about this, and they had a really good point too about like what it means to be a politician. And to me, there's two qualities. There's like this ability to communicate. There's this ability to understand politics, and this comes more from a career politician. They understand how to get things done, how to not get things done, how to talk to people. That's a really important quality. And then you also have this quality of like actually being knowledgeable in the thing that you're supposed to be knowledgeable about. And that's really important too, although it might be less important than actually being involved in politics. So with like the WWE girl being a part of education, it's like maybe her not being a teacher isn't super that important, because wasn't like Pete Buttigieg in charge of like infrastructure with like roads or something? And it's like, did this guy
transportation?
Yeah, like did this guy work for DOT or like?
I don't think that's even the main quarrel with it. I think the fact that you don't have to be like an established teacher, but like you have no political experience at all. Like at least Putin.
Does she have no?
I don't think she has any political experience.
Oh, okay.
I think she ran for Senate and lost. I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
She might. I might get that wrong because it just happened today. So
No,
I'm gonna go home
I see.
and check on that.
I've seen all of the memes about it, so I'm familiar.
And but and I explain this to a lot of people, and I hope sincerely that Trump does well, because
It's our country.
It's our country, and I'm not so committed to my viewpoints that I would rather the country go wrong or there be something bad happen. Just for political gain. I'm not that type of person. So all these appointments, the reason why they concern me is because I don't know if it puts him in the best position to really be effective and do well. But I guess time can only tell.
Yeah, and give me 1 second. Jasmine, are we good still? I see the TV is going on and off.
So I was trying to warn you about the time.
Oh, I see. What time is it? Oh, damn. Yeah. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, I'm definitely supportive of the administration, and one of the things too is like, I guess my fears with January 6th and that very obvious circumventing the transfer of power, that doesn't even actually worry me in a predictive sense. Like, I don't think he's going to do something like that again. To me, it's more of just like, we should be finding someone better. Like, we should be voting for someone different. And I don't even think that Trump's going to do a bad job. Like, I don't think he's going to ruin the world in the next 4 years. Yeah. Like, I really don't think that that's going to be the case. Either. It's going to be like, at the very worst, like a bad presidency.
And I just think the stain on him, and I just don't think he's capable of unifying the country. That's and that's what we need right now. We kind of need a social healing. So yeah.
Yeah, and I super agree. Well, we've been running over a little bit of an hour, and there are definitely things that we didn't get to. So maybe we'll come back and revisit this in another episode. But
Yeah.
I like to give the final words to you if you want to summarize something that you talked about, or if there's some kind of plugging you want to do, if you want to encourage people to read maybe specific papers that you have written, or if there's something in this episode that you found was a message that you want to get across to people. This is kind of your platform and your opportunity to just kind of close us out.
All right. Well, yeah. First off, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I'd love to come back and talk about some of the other stuff we didn't get to. But I think first and foremost, if anybody is interested in writing, if anybody, wants to engage with the happenings of their community, especially on campus, please reach out to me. You can find all my contact information and stuff on the Iowa State Daily Opinion website. And I think the biggest thing that perhaps I want people to take away from watching this, or say my views, is that I think we're all in a pursuit of truth. And this is, I think, maybe as you're interested in philosophy, I think that's probably the most crucial thing, is that we need to figure out a way as a society to unify and come back together. And so I hope that the discussion of free speech, the discussion of the importance of unity, consensus isn't always a thing worth adhering to, but I think it's important to move forward. And so I hope people can see this kind of dialogue, even though I think we agreed on a lot. I hope people can see it as being constructive in that sense. So, yeah.
Yeah, and Caleb, it was wonderful having you on, and thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.